Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with Jamie McIntyre, senior defense writer and a veteran Pentagon reporter. Jamie, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
So you have a piece in the magazine this week about the case of an American hostage in Afghanistan. Tell us about that.
So this is a person who is at risk of being left behind when all the American troops leave in just a couple of months. His name is Mark Frerichs, and he is a 58-year-old Navy veteran. He was kidnapped in Kabul just about the time the United States was finalizing this deal with the Taliban to leave. And although the deal required both the Taliban and the Afghan government to swap prisoners, there was no provision in this deal made for Mr. Frerichs. So, and in deference to what was going on at the time, it wasn't exactly clear who had him at the time. But now we know that he was captured by a group of people held by the Haqqani network and then turned over to the Taliban. So the Taliban have him, and they're not letting him go. They're trying to get something out of the United States for him. Meanwhile, the U.S. is focused on leaving, and the family is very concerned that he's just going to be left behind there now that the U.S. is essentially giving up its leverage to try to get his freedom.
What would happen to the U.S. leverage when all of the troops are pulled out? What could the U.S. do at that point to retrieve him?
The U.S. says they're not giving up on him, even though he wasn't made a condition of this withdrawal agreement, which, by the way, is a sticking point with some of the people who are advocating on behalf of the family. They say they still have ways to put pressure on the Taliban. They're still trying to secure his release. It's particularly galling to a congressman from Florida who's been an advocate for the family, and he's a really interesting guy. This is Mike Waltz, who's from the east coast of Florida, Daytona Beach, that area in there, Volusia County, and he's a former Green Beret. In fact, he's the Green Beret who led the search for Army Private Bo Bergdahl back during the Obama administration. You may remember Bergdahl is the guy who abandoned his post and then was held captive by the Taliban for 5 years.
Some comparisons have been drawn between this case and the case of Bo Bergdahl, which unfolded under the Obama administration. Do you see the two cases as similar?
So there is a similarity in the sense that they both have a military background. They're both being held by the Taliban, but that's where it really ends. In the case of Bo Bergdahl, he was a deserter, essentially. He abandoned his post and walked into the hands of the Taliban. Mr. Frerichs was kidnapped and is being held. But this came up when I was interviewing Congressman Waltz for a piece I did last week, that in the case of Bo Bergdahl, the United States pulled out all the stops to try to get him. In fact, they ended up giving up 5 high-value Taliban detainees in order to secure his release. And there was a manhunt across Afghanistan that was led by Congressman Waltz when he was a Green Beret in Afghanistan. And he was just contrasting the difference with the all-out approach to get Bergdahl out, who turned out he was eventually convicted of desertion, as opposed to the sort of ineffective efforts that they've done on behalf of Mr. Frerichs. So, and Waltz is interesting because he basically says the Trump administration should not have signed that agreement in February without making some provision to get this American home.
Has the Biden administration prioritized rescuing him at all?
So, the main person negotiating with the Taliban is Zalmay Khalilzad, the special representative. And Waltz in particular says he believes that Khalilzad was so focused on just trying to get this deal that he didn't pay enough attention to what was going on with the last hostage there. And he said, from his survival training that he took when he was a Green Beret, he says the worst feeling when you're being held hostage is to think that your country has given up on you. So he hasn't given up, the family hasn't given up, but the clock is ticking, and we'll have to see if they manage to do something to free him. And of course, one of the problems is once the U.S. troops are out, it's harder to mount a rescue mission, it's harder to get intelligence. So he risks being left behind when all the U.S. troops leave.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much for being here today. You can read more about the case of Mark Frerichs in this week's issue of the Washington Examiner magazine. You can sign up for Jamie's free morning newsletter at dailyondefense.com.